Hello and welcome to the United Forces show. It is Tuesday, the 20th of August, 2024. And today, Mike and I are going to be discussing the elections and politics and how that might or might not influence the way our lives go into the future. Could voting for the right team or for the right guy, the right president, the right prime minister, can any of that make a difference? Can it improve things? Or doesn't it matter? Either way, are we screwed no matter what? So I think we'll go there. That's going to be our first question on our first episode today. So, Mike, I'll pass it on over to you.
Well, given our past experience, I would say that it's just going to throw us into the mix. I mean, it's almost like you have a tennis game going on. The ball goes into one side of the court, everybody ooh, ah, and they hit the ball over the other side of the court. It's almost as if we have the same team on both sides. You know, one is going to be victorious on one side for a while, and the other one is the demonized side. And then they'll flip courts to the other court, and then they'll switch their duties so that one's bad and one's good, and the other one's bad and the other one's good. So we've got a lot of things going on that keep our minds occupied and keep our consciousness focused on what's going on. So they want to keep you within this game of back and forth, back and forth. Now, most of the time they'll say, okay, well, this side supports open borders and they do this sort of thing. But what is the other side doing to stop it? You have to look at both sides and you have to realize what is really going on below the surface. Now, the media is going to tell you, okay, go to this side, now go to this side, now go to this side, now go to this side. What they'll do is they'll give you enough to piss you off or get you all riled up. And then they'll say, okay, we're going to have a meeting and we're going to discuss this and we're going to come to the bottom of this. We're not going to let this happen. Well, it never happens. Well, they have a meeting, but it never changes anything. So no matter so we have two sides in the United States, and both sides all work together behind the scenes, but you're going to be the bad guy, and we're going to make you look bad, but we're not going to do anything about it. Even though we say we're going to do something about it, we're really not going to do anything about it because, we're all getting the paychecks from the same source. So we have to remain neutral within that portion of keeping this country and keeping the rest of the world in this state of uneasiness, in this state of doubt. And that's where we're always at. We're always in a state of doubt. There's always wars going on. And if for some reason we don't have a war going on or a conflict, then it'll be focused on the drugs and the declination of the cities and the fact that we're not keeping up our infrastructure. So it doesn't really matter who you have in charge, because even if you have this great person who's a savior that would be in that spot, everyone around him is the ones that have the actual duties performed. They aren't going to play along with it. So you can have the greatest person in the world running a country, but if those around him will not do their duties, then it's not going to happen. But they're not going to take a savior and put him in that position in the first place. Anybody who gets in any of these high positions has been cleared first. You can't take a bucket of healthy fish and throw them into a environmentally dangerous pond and expect the healthy fish to make the pond better. It's not going to happen that way. So what they do is they throw in already tainted fish so that they can survive the whole pond experience, and they know what's going to happen. They know the outcome before the actual event happens. They plan all the outcomes and they plan all the procedures before it even happens. So they're playing us. We're the piano, and they're playing us. They're playing whatever tune they choose to play because we are accepting whatever is given. I just want to bring up one thing when it has to do with politics and governments. A couple of years ago here in Arizona, we had an issue, and a lot of people came out of their homes and showed up downtown. Maybe, I don't know, 2,000 in a state is nothing, especially Arizona. We've got millions of people, and 2,000 people is not really anything. 2,000 people showed up, and they're protesting and this and that. And the next day, you maybe have 1,000. And within 5 days, you're down to 10 people. Now, in the past, people were much more in tune with what was going on with their environment and with their government. And they would show up in droves, and that's how they forced change. Now we're too lazy, and we're in our comfort zone. So we allow things to happen that we don't agree with just because we accept this false sense of security, and we believe that we have absolutely believe that we have zero effect on what's going to happen. And the only reason we don't have an effect on it is because we choose not to.
With regards to the protests, I see the exact same thing over here in the UK, despite what happened a week or two ago, where it appeared that we had loads of, protests / riots everywhere. It's my view, and it was on the day that it happened, that those, quote, riots were controlled opposition. They were intel agencies, the US, you'd call it maybe COINTELPRO, the FBI, infiltrating. Well, that was our equivalent of the similar sort of thing. And I think the idea behind that was, if you cause a ruckus out in public, make sure the news cameras there, make sure the police show up. What you then do is you can find out who in that crowd is more of a leader type / follower. And I think those leader types that would appear in those protests, whether they throw bins or not is irrelevant. The fact that they're there, they're trying to rally people in some way, whether they're trying to tell people to calm down or whether they're trying to egg people on. Again, I'm not talking about the controlled opposition here. I'm talking about the people who genuinely turn up to do what they think is right. I think those people who show these leadership qualities are immediately identified by the police, by the agencies, whoever. And if they don't already know who they are, and I think these people are then, they're probably arrested under some guise or other, and I reckon they'll probably try and co-opt them in the first place, and then, and I'm not sure how that would work, or if they're not willing to play ball, or they get the feeling that this person isn't going to play along, then they can just lock them up with some trumped up charge. But with regards to the two sides, it being like a tennis game, it's exactly the same over here. A few years ago, we ostensibly had a third side that we had conservatives, which would be like your... Hang on, let me get this right. The conservatives would be like your Republicans. Our Labour would be like your Democrats. And then we also had... I can't even... It's gone blank now who they are. They were a tiny third option, and they sort of played down the middle. But they were always portrayed in such a way that they were never going to win, and they never did. And I don't think they would have made any difference. And like Mike says, everybody who plays politics at this level is cleared. I'm 100% on board with that. I think if you get into politics at a very small, low, local level, the town council, and it's a small town, whatever it is, you can probably join there and you don't need any clearance whatsoever. But I imagine once you start working your way up, at some point between your little town council where you can maybe vote on where the park bench is going to get placed, or if we're going to repaint the cricket pavilion next week, like, I think that's where your power starts and ends. But when you get from there to a more regional level, I suspect somewhere on that path, if you're really trying to go there, they've got their agents and they're looking for people who they can co-opt and corrupt. And at the end of the day, if you're somebody that's got some sort of, let's use the word fetish, that doesn't quite fit in with societal norms, let's say it's something to do with kids, I think that's the most common one. If they find that you have some sort of fetish like that, some perversion, I think then it makes it very easy for them to say, hey, we can offer you this thing, but by the way, if you say no, we're going to make a big stink out of this, and that those pictures you've got on your computer or whatever it is, you know, we can make life very difficult for you. But if you're willing to play along, we can give you all of that and all the cover that you want in the world. But what we're going to need you to do is say some things for us. And that thing that you were saying about improving standards of living for everybody, we don't want you to talk about that so much anymore. Instead, we want you to talk about, I don't know, tax breaks for the rich or whatever it is that they're trying to push. And I think that's how they ensure this works. And I think the further you go up, everybody up there is not just corrupt as in they're paid off. I believe they've got dirt on them all so that nobody can ever have a change of heart 10, 20 years in and then think, hang on, what I'm doing here is wrong. I'm going to be dead in a year or two anyway, so I'm going to spill the beans, because you never get that happening. And so I think these people have got that much dirt on them, and there's probably a threat hanging over everybody they care about. And so all that you've got to do is play ball. And I'm assuming there, Mike, that these people are in some way like us, with feelings and fears and hopes and desires, as opposed to just some sort of alien entity that is hiding within a human body. So I think, I don't know what you think to that, Mike, how you think they control the politicians. How do you think that happens? Because it's clear to, I think, everybody watching this show, doesn't matter which country you're from, the politicians are not helping. Everybody is making the country worse. They always say they're trying to help, but they always make it worse. And I think that's very deliberate. But how do you think they control them to make that happen?
Well, anytime you have a political office or you go for political office, you have to have financial backing. And that's the key right there. Once you financially back somebody or have to support somebody, there's your level of manipulation. You know, if you want this, and what they do is they pick people by individual type, like narcissists and stuff. They look for people that they can control and they can groom. So they know that if they want to move up in the political agenda, then you're going to have to need that financial backing. They utilize that money in order to manipulate them into what they need them to do, and it works both ways. So it's a very easy tool to manipulate people, especially with money. So I think that's probably their number one choice. And once you've got that, also you have that individual's personality type locked in, because they know how to read those people, and that's fine. These people are on the physical. I don't look at non-physical stuff generally when I look at politics. But what happens is, we've got this system set up, and it began behind obviously greed and that sort of thing. But they don't really base themselves in the non-physical. But the whole idea behind what's going on in our world is based on the non-physical. It's based upon things that happen at the lower levels. You know, a lot of these politicians belong to these religious sects and that sort of thing. And what they do is they utilize Satanism and that sort of thing. That's part of their whole process, you know. And then people know all about, you know, the astral. They've heard about it and all the other things that are happening. We're steered away from, you know, UFOs and Bigfoot and all this other stuff. we're steered away from a lot of that information because it's just a bunch of BS. It's not real, but it does have a foundation in what's happening here on Earth. And if you're going to control anything at any place, you want to be able to control the leaders. The leaders are the ones that, if you control the leaders and those up high, then you're going to control the majority of the population. So there is a foundation based upon something non-physical in what's going on and what's happening in our world on a regular basis. Because most people, other than profiting from war, and there's not a ton of people that are going to profit from war. There has to be another reason behind having wars other than just population control and money. There's a lot of reasons behind suffering and war, and politics plays a big part of that. And politics also and governments are also the perpetual tools they use in order to keep suffering and depression and fear and manipulation, deceit, deception, all that stuff is centered within that. And that's how they get things done. So they control the politicians, and in turn, the politicians make these decisions as if they're trying to make our lives better, but actually they're making it worse. And people will believe it because they figure, okay, well, I don't want to go against the system because I don't want to be pinpointed, or I don't want to go to jail or whatever. They're so afraid of making a decision because they think, this will happen or this will happen, when they don't really know anything about anything that's going to happen. They would just rather be fearful sheep than to stand up for themselves and their families. Because everybody who stands up is going to make a difference. And the more people who stand up, then it begins to change what's happening to us. Like in the past, people would stand up. They wouldn't put up with this crap. And now everybody is cowering because you have no faith in yourself. You don't have any faith in that you can make changes because you've been told and you've been manipulated to believe that you don't have any power whatsoever. These morons who are put in these positions of politics and leadership, they're not smart. They're following orders. Their orders are compartmentalized. They only know a very small fraction of what's happening around them. They just do what they're told. Above them is more intelligence. But they themselves, they don't know really what's going on. They don't know the big picture. So they follow it. And that's what everybody does on a daily basis. You do what you're told and you follow the rule. And in turn, each one of us is completing a piece of the puzzle that creates our own demise. Because you go along with the script. You follow what you're being told. You don't think for yourself. You don't question anything. You do what you're told. Because you're not an individual at this point. You're just part of the masses. And the reason why we're in this situation is exactly because of that. Because you follow the rules, you don't ask questions, and you don't stand up for yourself or anybody else. You're definitely not going to stand up for someone else, but you don't even stand up for yourself. And I'm not talking about just grabbing a gun. It goes far beyond that. It comes down to saying no. I will not do that. I don't care what you say or what you think you're going to do, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not following that rule. That's against my moral standards, my moral codes, and I refuse to do that. Most people, probably 99.9% of the people, will never do that. They will never say that. There are a good amount of people that will stand up and do that, but not enough.
Well, you said a lot there, Mike, and I know people in my little circle in, what I would say is real life, that know something is going on, whether it's to a little or a greater extent, and they are too afraid to say anything. They know it's wrong. They know what's going on is wrong, and they are too fearful. Like they I'll say something like, oh, why don't you make a a post on Facebook, or why don't you go and tell your friends at wherever, and they're too afraid. It's incredible, and it's reduced to like where somebody knows somebody, or somebody at work said or something about 9/11, and so now it's like, well, I feel I can talk to this one individual, but that's it. And so I find it weird that how afraid, like really afraid, a lot of people are. Like you say, it's a fear, and this fear is it's a lie, it's a trick, it's a program. And when I feel afraid about something, it's not as easy to just say, oh, it's a trick, it's a program. So I know what fear is like, but I find it amazing how widespread this fear is, and I think it's the fear that is paralyzing. It's truly paralyzing. It's probably one of the, if not the biggest obstacle I think we face. It's probably even bigger than disinformation. One of the things you were saying, Mike, was about people no longer protesting, or certainly not as big and effective as it used to be. And I've thought that for months, and I've said to my girlfriend, because we grew up, well, we were very young, so we don't really remember it. But the whole miners' strike in this country, there was a big thing. Well, while Margaret Thatcher was still the Prime Minister in this country, and she was basically closing down the mines, the whys and the wherefores. I don't know, perhaps they were moving on to nuclear, whatever it was. But the upshot was you had miners, and you had entire towns whose entire employment was the coal pit, the mine. And these people went on strike en masse. And if you take a look online, if people haven't seen it, there's all this footage of miners striking everywhere. And I'm thinking, what changed? What changed between that then? It wasn't like they walked down the road holding a sign and then everybody went on tomorrow. These people were out every single day. And in some cases, these protests became violent because of, these people felt very strongly about what was happening, and their entire way of life was getting dismantled in front of them for whatever the reason may have been. It's probably some green policy, but that's by the by. The fact is, something was happening that was wrong. It was interfering with people's way of life, and these people stood up for themselves en masse. You've got these videos where you've got hundreds of miners on one side, hundreds of police at the other, and they're charging at one another. Now, ultimately, I think there were some concessions made where they kept hold of a few mines that otherwise wouldn't have been, to try and sort of appease these people. But I think that is the victory, because had these people not have done anything, they'd have just shut every single mine. Nobody would have said anything, and that would have been the end of the story. Now, did the miners get everything they want? Well, obviously not. A lot of mines were shut. There is a lot of unemployment there. And where was it? One more thing I was wanting to say here about all of this. Yeah, about when you were talking about politicians not being very bright. And again, I agree with this. I think they're all actors, and I include both sides in that at all the government or governmental levels. I think they've got to learn their script. I think they've got to understand the very basics about what it is that they're saying. So if somebody asks them a question, at least most of the time, they can give a somewhat semi-convincing answer. And we've all seen examples where this falls apart. But I think that's the case. And these politicians report to a higher power. And it was when you were saying that, Mike, it got me thinking of this old quote. And again, this is Woodrow Wilson. I was looking it up as you were speaking. And this is it. And this is what the guy says. And I wanted to know what you thought about this, Mike. Since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. And that was a quote there from Woodrow Wilson. And so I'd like to ask you, Mike, what do you think he was talking about?
Well, like I said, and when I talk about outer worldly or spiritual type of instances, we're surrounded. We see less than 1% of our visual spectrum. This is physical. This is all physical. So there are things that surround us that we don't even know that are there because we physically can't see them. That's a simple fact. We know that. Now, there are things that are on the spirit plane, which is in the astral and in the mental planes. There's so much going on around us that we have no concept of it. And what I said is the basis for all of this hate and this warmongering and all this greed is beyond. It begins and is based beyond our physical world. Okay, so what people are fearing are beyond this physical world. And if you've heard, I think a lot of times people have had these satanic rituals and that sort of thing, where the actual entity can create a somewhat. Now, when they do these sacrifices and stuff, what it does is those spirits can actually take some sort of a physical form at those times during those that process. They can take physical form in general most of the time, but what they do is during those ceremonies, they come to light. And a lot of people in these sects, SECTS, not sex, but sex, religious sects or whatever clubs they have, they take, they get, what's it called? Possessed, or a type of possession. And they communicate with these entities and stuff, and they control them. Because I've met a lot of these within the dream state, which is basically on the lower astral level. I've met them. I've confronted them. They've been confronting me since I was a small child, and as a small child, it's completely terrifying, you know. And I've met them as an adult many times, and what they do is they stalk you. They stalk you within that state. They stalk you within your dreams. And fortunately, over time, I've been desensitized because I've been approached by them so many times. I begin to understand what's happening. And finally, I got to the point where I faced them, it was face to face. I was completely lucid within that dream, and I would not back down. I turned my back on it, and I moved away. So what I knew at that point is it meant absolutely nothing. There was no harm to me, that it was just basically feeding off of my fear. And at that point, I wasn't fearful. I stood up and I went face to face with it. So what's happening is they can only control by manipulation, by deceit, by illusion, by dream state type of putting you in like dream state type of consciousnesses. So what they do is they manipulate these people, and these people work with them, and then they get their orders, and they get, because we're dealing with entities that are far beyond our level of conception in a physical body. Since we've been mind wiped, we don't have a lot of this information. They have it. So what they do is they use these things, the psychological manipulation, and that sort of thing. And fear is their biggest tool. So what they do is they create fear within the ones that work with them, and then therefore the ones that are doing things to us are also in fear based. So everything that happens, and when I say the politicians are stupid, I meant, and in this way, a lot of them are really stupid, but the other way is, if you were actually really smart, if you were actually an intelligent person, you would realize, okay, you're being manipulated for the purpose of manipulating the masses. which in turn is deceiving your whole country. You're backstabbing everybody on this planet to get ahead. And not only that, is you're destroying everything for your future generations. Now, if that isn't stupid, I don't know what is. Because they're aware that they're not doing good for themselves, for everybody else, and their future generations. Where do they think it's going to go? You know, if people would stop, would stop working towards their own demise, then we could halt this. Because nobody, no small pack of people or no small amount of people, and I say it's small, maybe even 10 or 50,000, whatever. We've got 8 billion, there's 50,000, say. Those people can't change our world unless we allow it to happen, because everybody on this planet does a job. We all have a job. And if we all say, hey, I won't do anything that's going to promote this agenda, if somebody tells me to do something I know it's wrong, I'm not doing it. If everybody took that attitude and said, hey, the buck stops here, then we wouldn't have digital money. Then we wouldn't have these politicians destroying our world. Then we wouldn't have rampant violence and crime promoted by our own governments. Then we wouldn't have corporations destroying our environment. They blame it on us and driving our cars when they're pumping millions of gallons of toxic chemicals into the ocean or septic waste into the rivers. So they're blaming it on us when they're the ones who are in charge of this whole situation. So unless we stand up and take a stand, and we have to start on an individual basis, things will only get worse until you don't have a choice to stand up. Because at some point, if you keep drawing your line closer and closer to your front door, by the time it gets to your front door, it's already too late. Because once they reach your house, it's all over with. You have to make a stand long before that in order for to take effect on anything. And people just think, well, I can just wait a little bit longer. Well, if I just wait until after this election, if the election comes out in our favor, then we're going to be really good and then everything's going to work out. Okay, so even if it was even if the person for the next 4 years perfected everything and made everything perfect, what happens in the next 4 years? It's not going to be perfect anyways. So what's going to happen is the decline might be a little bit slowed down in certain areas, but trust me, it's not going to stop. The agenda will not stop because one person got elected. It's going to continue, but it'll continue more behind the scenes at some points. But you're not going to win. You're never going to win. The only way you're going to win is if you stand up, if you say no, if you stop playing the game. And when we just talked about fear is a tool. Fear isn't an emotion. And what happens is, so if you're somehow fearing something, that means you're being manipulated at some level. Once you understand how the manipulation works, or once you understand what's causing your fear, a lot of times people just fear things of what could happen. They're not sure, of what. It could be anything, like a dark figure. Oh, well, I fear that because I don't know what it is. Well, if you could see it, would you fear it as much? Well, why would you even fear something you don't understand? Why would you fear that? You have to put yourself in order. You have to understand that you can fear anything. You can fear a piece of paper. Well, I can't pick that piece of paper up. It might cut me. It might do this. It might do that. Well, yeah, there's a million things that can happen. But it's time for you to stand up and realize, hey, if I fear everything, then once I get to the point where I just let it go, I'll fear everything. Because if it gets to the point of the agenda succeeding, then fear will be your only emotion.
Yeah, the agenda as I see it, and we'll do this, perhaps look at it in another show. It's a great idea actually, where where Mike and where I think this where the agenda is ultimately designed to go. But in a nutshell, I think it's designed to lock people into a virtual reality kind of system that hooks directly into what we would call our brain. And this virtual reality system would have you where you're not wandering outside doing anything anymore, but basically, like in these films, you're sort of in a pod. And who knows, we might already be in such a situation in this world. And I think they're going to try and basically lock us into another similar situation like that. And if they can do that, if they get direct access, you know, this Neuralink stuff, whatever Elon Musk's on about, if they can get direct access to your brain, however that would work, imagine, okay, they can say, oh, well, it would only be to pass information, or only if you want to share a text will that text get shared. Okay, but what about when you don't want? You know, once the thing's in there, they can do what they like to you. The masts are everywhere, and I think that's designed so that once whatever this technology gets inside you, that you can't escape it. But imagine if they made you feel, you know, they've already said emotions, they can measure them on these brainwave charts. Well, imagine if they can inject those emotions into you. If they feed off loosh, then it stands to reason that they're, to get the absolute most out of you that they possibly can, is by turning you into a non-stop, depressed, frightened, fearful, anxious wreck of a mess, and just keep feeding you these electronic frequencies to make you like that. And then as you're producing this loosh, this spiritual negative energy as a consequence, you can just imagine them sat there eating it all up. And in short, that's why I think this agenda is intended to take everybody. And so, you know, to say you're afraid what somebody might say if you say something is a terrible cop-out, really. And, you know, the fact that I know people like that is, you know, it's I just think if only you knew where this thing's going. And sometimes they can see that everything is downhill. Everybody knows it used to be better 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Everybody. Like, the only thing that's gotten better is the speed of the internet and the price of DVD players. Everything else has gotten worse. And everybody can see it. And like Mike says, this agenda is never going to stop. It is going to continue to go on. Now, if somehow some politician from some miracle gets in that isn't on board with that agenda, I agree 100%. The only thing that's going to happen is the agenda is going to slow down for a while this guy gets knocked from pillar to post. And then as soon as the 4 years has passed and he's out again, it will continue on. And one thing that I really wanted to say is one of their huge tools for manipulation is hope and change and the future. Because the only time you can ever make a change is right now. Every other idea of the past is gone, and every idea of the future is, you can only think about the future now. It's just an idea until now, and now is always now, and it's the only time you can do anything. So if they're trying to make things worse, this is what they'll do. They'll make things worse for you right now, but then they will tell you, oh, but at some point in the future, we'll ease off and things can go back to the way that they were. And it never happens, because they might take 10 things away from you today, now, and then they'll promise you can get them back in the future. And maybe one day down the line, they do give you 4 or 5 of those things back. But at the end of the day, you've still lost 5 things and you never get those back. And, you know, we can not just point at COVID, but 9/11, which was the big one for me. Look at all the rights and freedoms, especially in America, you know, with your Patriot Act and all the rest of it. That was the least patriotic thing you could ever think of. And how many You got the Emergency Powers Act or something that somehow suspended the Constitution, and they could arrest people without a trial or without a. It was horrific, the things that they were saying. They voted somehow that a drone could kill an American citizen with just on the president's say so. It's like all of these things were brought in, and here we are 20, 25 years later. And even if you believe 9/11 was real, which of course it was, the event took place, but it weren't who we were told it was. But even if it was, now that problem's been dealt with, we still have the results of all the laws that were brought into place that day, Homeland Security and whatever else. I mean, they didn't just wrap up these departments and say, all right, guys, we're done here, good job, and everybody went home. They carried on. And the last point I want to make, Mike, is on the protests themselves. I think chemicals in the food, in the water, in medications, and especially in vaccines is in large part responsible for why people have less get up and go about them. And I know in my own generation, I feel like I was one of the first generations where things like this were starting to be brought in. I remember at school it being in my final year that I attended at school, all of a sudden there was a whole bunch of agendas that didn't exist before. Agendas that in today's age have just been ramped up more and more and more. And we're talking about things that 30 years ago everybody said that's crazy, or that's retarded, or that'll never happen, or that's an illness, or whatever. And today it's been normalized and pushed. And I think doing all of that at school, together with the chemicals in the food and in the water, and I'm not saying there weren't ever chemicals, but they're ramping all these things up, I think it's having a huge impact on the way both people look in terms of appearance. There are so many, where I live, that it's not just that people are overweight now. We didn't see that here 20 years ago. I had a class of 30 people and there was one fat kid in the class, one fat kid. Today you go outside, it's almost every other kid, and it's the same with the adults. And I'm not exactly skinny myself. I wouldn't say I was huge either, but I'm not even sat here eating chocolate bars and crisps and all the rest of it. There is something somehow in the food, in the water, even when you think you're trying to do a good job, and the consequence of these chemicals, in my opinion, is a huge part responsible for why people are no longer as proactive and informed as they used to be. And I'm not trying to make excuses to say, oh, well, therefore you don't need to do anything. All that I'm saying is this is actually just it's yet another hurdle that we need to get across. And it's sad. I genuinely feel sad when I see little kids drooling, jam jar glasses on, rocking around in a wheelchair, and you think these are 3 and 4 year old kids. You used to get one kid like that in, I don't know, 100 or whatever it was, and now it's almost normal to see kids like this. And I find that incredibly sad. And I think these are all, again, just my opinion. I have to be very careful here living in the UK, but my opinion, these are down to chemicals in the food and the water that are in large part responsible. And whether it makes you into a drooling mess or it just makes you a bit overweight in weird shapes as well, Mike. We have these weird shapes with people. Like some people look like they've got a pregnancy. Others will be real skinny and then have these massive fat legs. Sometimes you've got like pretty average and then this huge ass, as we would call it, that sort of goes out in all directions. And this isn't normal. This is some sort of weapon that has been used against us that makes us less able to be proactive and makes us more dependent on the system.
We've got multi-levels of interference. They're poisoning our food, our water, the air, and we're programmed from the time that we're born. We're programmed with misinformation constantly through our daily lives, and also within the dream state, we're also affected there. We're also dealt with programming there. So it's a multi-level onslaught against us. So it's not just the political portion of our daily lives or anything of that nature. It's constant. What it does is it weakens us. We're spiritual beings in physical bodies. We're trapped here. Now, being a spiritual being, you obviously have a much broader spectrum of knowing, understanding. But since we're insulated, highly insulated, and we're insulated from our source, we are really dumbed down in these situations, and we're much weaker than what we normally would be. So that's how it keeps us enthralled into the system. So if you have somebody with multiple medical problems and you're feeling lethargic and this and that, then you're going to be less likely to stand up for yourself, or you're going to be less likely to worry about anything other than your daily life, because you're just hyper-focused on just trying to stay healthy or get through the day. Completely understandable. We all have to deal with certain things in our lives, or multiple things in our lives, that create havoc. What that does is it just makes you hyper-focused on your daily life. This way you won't think of anything spiritual. This way you won't focus on what's going on around you. They want you to stay hyper-focused on what they want you. All the shiny objects that come up on the news every day, stay focused and depressed about that. And when you talked about the low energy, since we do emit low energy when we're depressed and fearful and that sort of thing, obviously we emit that, they collect that, and that's why the whole AI thing is going on, because why would you wouldn't have to portray the media and all this other stuff, all this bad news and all these bad instances, if you can just completely short circuit the whole process and just make us produce low level vibrations all the time through their AI system. That's the whole point of it. I mean, right now we've got these things, phones, we've got them in our vehicles, we got them in every portion of our life, we got them on our watches, we got them everywhere. So we're constantly connected to their devices right now. They figure, okay, now we get them super relying on these devices. Then if we just put them in their head to make it easier, they don't have to carry it around, they're really going to go for that, because that really works out good. They have to get you used to them. They have to get you relying on them. Then once they do that, then just put the chip in there. It's not a big deal. It doesn't hurt, blah blah blah, and you're going to go for it. And that's why people are going so easily into this, because they figure, well, I like to stay on the edge of technology, so I'm going to do whatever I have to do. And that way I can just use my hand, and you can get past the card access at my work, and I can read everything. When I want to go pay for something, just wave my hand over. It's just such a cool idea. Well, no, you're giving up every right. So what they do is, first they give you a technology. They give it to you. And then once you get dependent on it, then they said, we're going to charge you a little bit. They're going to charge you a little bit more. Then they're going to charge you a little bit more, and you'll pay it because you're addicted to it. And then they'll do something. Well, we need to do something a little bit more invasive. Okay, well, I guess. Okay, well, we'll do it for free. Okay, well, then it's going to cost you. Then it's going to cost you. You just keep. Every time you give up something, you're giving away a little bite or a little bit of your freedom, okay, and your individuality. And you just keep giving away more and more. Now, the problem is if you give away 10% of it, in order to get that 10% back, it takes a whole lot of effort on everybody's part in order for it to do that. You can't just back up or put it in reverse. It doesn't work that way. Every time you give something up, it takes about 10 times the amount of effort into giving it up than it does to get it back. Most people never get anything back. So every day we're giving up a little bit more, a little bit. Oh, everybody's talking about we're going to be a cashless society. Some people think it's cool. The other ones know, hey, if we give that up, then they have total control of us. Total control. You get a traffic ticket, you don't even have to go to court anymore. They're just going to take the money out, whether you have it or not. Your social score, all that stuff. So people are going along with this, just thinking, oh, this is the next cool thing. We got to stay update. We got to do all this. No, all it is just an invasion into your personal life. People don't realize that. And the ones that do realize it go, yeah, all they're doing is talking about it. All the news channels, oh, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk. We don't want this to happen. Guess what? Where are their solutions? There's none. They're not going to give you solutions, because by fear mongering and getting you into their news station, they're going to keep you tuned in. Tune in. We might have an idea. We might have an idea. Well, they're never going to give you an idea. It's BS. So my thing is, and what we're coming out to here is, if you don't want, it's a simple process. If you don't want cashless society, then stand up for it. Don't go to your freaking bank. Get a bunch of people together. Get rallies. The other side, shit. They want to have 10,000 people. They show up and they burn buildings. I mean, not saying that's what you're supposed to do, but they burned buildings and got away with it. And our side won't even get 10 people together and go to a bank and say, we ain't putting up with this crap. You know, go to Congress, go to whatever. You know, you've got a brain. You've got a mind. Think it. You had a lot of smart people out there. But if you don't use it, then what the hell's it good for? Because all you're doing is you're just looking at a timeline. You're saying, okay, well, right, another 5 years, you know, we're going to be really screwed. Oh, yeah, well, and you just, the next day, another 499 days. Well, you're just going to keep counting down until your last day. Wow, that's something to look forward to. Okay, we don't need another list of problems. Everybody knows our problems. We know our problems. Solutions is what we need. Answers. But every solution begins with you. Don't look to anybody. Don't look to Trump. Don't look to any other politician to save your ass, because he's not going to do it. Everybody has their own agenda, and that's what they stick to. And just because they say they're going to do this for you doesn't mean it. Because how many people do you know got in office? Oh, they promised you this moon and the stars. You didn't do anything. Well, I couldn't do that. Congress said no. And then, I couldn't do this. And everybody's got an excuse. Either that or they just won't say anything. They just ignore it because they don't give a shit. You got them in there? Screw you. You know, I got what I wanted. Screw you. That's the way it always works out. Because everybody's out for themselves. So if you want something done, then get up off your ass and do it. Because really, there's no aliens who are going to come to this planet and save us. What the hell would they want to do that for? Why would somebody want to stick their neck out for a bunch of people that don't give a shit? If they can't save themselves or even try to save themselves, why would they care? Why would anybody? Because it's always going to be the great stories where we got a savior. He's going to come down here and he's going to clear out all the bad guys. And then everything's going to be cool. You know, the world's going to go back to, there's not going to be any toxic waste. Oh, everything's going to be so cool. Well, everybody sits around thinking, oh, yeah, we got a savior coming. That's a good story. And there's a million stories out there to tell you about, oh, yeah, the aliens are coming here to save us. Buddha's going to come here. Jesus is going to come here. Grandma's going to come here. They're all going to come here, and they're all going to gang up on the bad guys, and they're going to kick their asses. Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, yeah. Like, okay, so when has that ever happened before? Never, because it's never going to happen. The only time anything ever changed in our history of anything is if we stood up against it. And there's more of us than there are of them. So it's not that big of a deal. But without anybody, doing anything about it, it's not going to happen. It all comes down to us, each one of us, individuals. If you want your freedom, you take it back.
I think if we consider the bad guys, whoever they are or whoever they may be answering to, are not stupid, I get frustrated when I see individuals writing in comments, oh, they're stupid, they're getting sloppy, they're making mistakes. No. If they make a, quote, mistake that you identify, and I'm just going to use the example, an astronaut in the ISS hanging off a safety harness. So that video's there, NASA put it out. Some people are going to say that's a mistake, but I'm going to say, with a budget like that, when they're not doing a live feed, do you not think that somebody somewhere would have seen the wire and said, oh, we should really edit that out before we put it on there? Of course not. It's a mistake on purpose, and I think they've put that mistake there because they know A small number of us are going to see it, and we're going to say, hey, everybody, look at this. And when we do that, the majority of the people that are around us are going to look at us like we're crazy. And if you consider how intelligent our enemy is, whoever they are, to set that up times a million in every facet of life, where the only mistakes that happen are just enough that we can see them, but they're never enough that the majority of people can see them. Because if the majority of people could see that it doesn't matter who they vote for, the same thing's going to happen anyway. The majority of the people would no longer play that game, and the whole thing would fall apart. But they're able to keep it going so that the majority of the people always believe what they say. We're always in the minority every time, so they're not stupid.
And we plan ahead, maybe 3 days or a week? They plan ahead over 100 years. Big difference. I mean, they plan long term, and they plan on multi levels. We're thinking is just the physical. We're so limited in comparison. We're not even on the same playing field. Where it's like taking a seasoned NFL team of all the best players and putting them against a ragtag group of older men that have never played football. What they tell the players is, you have no rules. But the amateurs are told, oh, there's a whole list of rules you got to learn in order for it to play. And then when they're out there playing, they're just sacking the hell out of them, beating the crap out of them. They're saying, well, you can't do that. Well, they just keep doing it. And the other guys are like, oh, no, we need to play by the rules. We can't do what they're doing because that's just not fair. But they're getting the hell beat out of them, and they don't realize it because they're too busy following rules that nobody else follows. The politicians and the governments and big businesses make rules, but those rules only apply to us. They don't have any rules.
And I think that the other big point that you say about the idea of a savior, again, this is what, as a truth community, if I can use such a word, it's one of the biggest obstacles that we face, because these bigger channels that, in my opinion, are controlled opposition, I'm just going to name a couple of them: Joe Rogan, Alex Jones. I think most people who are beyond the first few years realize that these are controlled opposition. They will always admit, oh yeah, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. Yes, that's bad, that shouldn't happen. They're on board with that. But you see, the great thing is, if all I have to do is, oh, okay, I see it's all wrong, everything's bad, but don't worry, somebody's going to be showing up soon. They'll never put a time on it, because of course if they did, that time would come and go, and then, well, it falls apart. So nobody's going to know when the savior shows up, but he will show up and he will wrong all the rights. Well, that's great for me, because now I don't have to do anything. I can just sit here, twiddle my thumbs and think, well, it doesn't matter that everything's amiss, because, my alien friend is going to come down, maybe next year, maybe the year after, and they're going to fix everything. And, I've got this old historical book from ways back when, no chance it could have been corrupted, and on page 300 and whatever it is, it says right here that Saviour's going to return and put everything right. And I'm not trying to take the piss, as we would say, but rather highlight that if you were an evil being, but you were small in number, maybe you've got let's just use the term, there's a few guys, and you're trying to deceive millions, if not billions of people, wouldn't you try to get these people to think that A, they have no power, and B, okay, well, even if things are bad, don't worry about it, because there's some supremely powerful being gonna come that's gonna put things right for you. And the last question on that would be, these evil people, these bad guys, the enemies that we face, if there really was some savior coming, do you not think that they would know that there is a savior coming? And if they did know that there was some sort of savior coming, do you not think that they would fear that savior? If this savior was all powerful and able to put all the wrongs right, then these bad guys would surely be trying to do right so that they can get into the good books of this savior. Because the idea of a savior coming and putting the world to rights, to me, sounds like all the bad guys are just going to get cleared off the table in one way or another. And that, if the bad guys would surely see that coming, and they would have to change, otherwise they're going to face annihilation. So the fact they carry on at full steam ahead with no regard for any sort of a savior at all, to me suggests, well, if anybody's going to know, it's going to be those people, because those people are way ahead. And again, this isn't about being pessimistic or like hopeless. Quite the opposite. This is about people realizing, and you know, Mike said this on the first show, I think, that the savior is who you look at in the mirror. That is the savior. There is no savior coming to do for you what you won't do yourself. And you know, I include myself in that. Are there things that I could improve on? Yes, but that's the idea of all of this. There are all things that we can do, and every little change that we can make, no matter how small it is, will have a possible a positive impact. And I've always likened that analogy of with a pebble in a pond. You know, you can pick the smallest stone and throw it into a pond, and it will still make ripples, and those ripples are like going through the matrix. And I think, okay, the littlest pebble ultimately isn't going to make the biggest difference ever, but those ripples quite literally have a knock-on effect as they spread out, and as the more they spread out, the wider it gets and the more of an influence it has. Even if you then say, oh yeah, but after 2 minutes the pond's level again, okay, well, throw another one in then, or make it slightly bigger next time. And the more people that are throwing pebbles into the pond, the more ripples we're going to make. And the more, like Mike said this as well, and I'm just going to steal it, that they've got this thing so well planned so long into the future that they're obviously using some extremely accurate ways and means of prediction. And so far, their predictions seem to be working pretty well for them, because all the victories seem to be going towards them, and we don't seem to be getting very many, if any, victories at all on our side. And so we ain't going to change things by doing the same things what we've been doing. We need to change things somehow. And the same goes for everybody, because if we can change things, and the more of us that can behave in some way differently to the way we were behaving before, the more it's going to throw their predictive models off. And then I think, and I agree, we have more of a chance of changing things for good. Mike, what do you think about all of that? It was your idea.
Yeah, if you want people to be I don't know, passive, then you're going to give them information in order to make them love everybody and this and that, while we're going to have our own beliefs. And then they want to take all of your individual belief within yourself and have you portray it into somebody else. So you'll have a savior that you need to depend on, not yourself. And then if you're 20 guys who want to take over a village of 500, what you're going to do is you're going to portray yourselves as the saviors. You're going to walk into a village and they are going to welcome you with open arms, because you are the one that's there to save them. Then at night, you take over the village. And what you've done is you've just utilized their small thinking and their small belief system against them. And that's what gets used against us on a daily basis. We are dealing with something psychologically that is far beyond our conception, and it's multi-level. So we see something, by the time we figure it out, it's long gone. They've already moved on to something else. You know, you're dealing with an enemy. Now, when we say, okay, we're moving towards this agenda, this probably isn't their first agenda. This probably isn't their first victory. This might be their 10,000th. We might be the 10th or 100,000th society that has been in this situation. So they know just about every move that we could possibly make. It's like, okay, you input all this information, all the invasions ever recorded by mankind's history, and if you say, okay, we're at this level in the game, what should we do next? Well, based upon all of our past experiences, this is what you do next. They predict things. They have ways of predicting. So when we make changes, the system changes around us. So we have to be much more intelligent and more unconventional. Unconventionality is what we need to do. When you're unconventional, you don't work along with the system. We work outside of the system. The system wants to believe that you're going to keep making the same decisions based upon what a normal person that would be like a sheep mentality. You know, everything flows in a certain way, but you start making decisions outside of that spectrum, then it changes the whole spectrum of what their predictions are. So what we need to do is we need to be unpredictable and unconventional. That is probably our biggest tool right now, besides becoming independent, realizing what's going on, and thinking for yourself. Because if you don't act for you, nobody else will. Don't ever believe. And you even know from your personal experience in life, when has anybody ever stood up and really stepped up and took on your responsibilities? If it ever happened, then you're one of the very few people in the whole entire earth that's ever happened. But that's good for you, but don't expect that. Don't expect everybody to carry your load, because they're not going to do it. They're too busy trying to figure out and carry their own loads. And if we don't begin to start carrying our own loads and standing up for ourselves, then you won't have to worry about it in a while, because you'll be told what to do and you'll do it. Or they'll just do it to you. It doesn't matter, because there won't be anybody else to stand up for you, because you didn't stand up for you. So why would anybody else?
I think part of their agenda with all the automation and robotics, and you see these Boston Dynamics things that look like dogs and they can jump around and one can open the door as the other one trots through. I see, obviously they're not doing that just for a few YouTube videos. I think they're doing that so that in the future, as they continue tightening the screws, as even certain police and military start to think, hang on, what's going here is wrong, they can then slowly begin to replace these people. And it reminds me a few years ago here with the banks, that it was when they first started bringing in online banking with the mobile phone. And, you know, I'm not sure exactly how many years ago, but let's say 5 years ago, just before the so-called pandemic rolled around, they really started pushing these apps in branch. So if you went into the bank to move some money or whatever it was, pay in a check, whatever, they would ask you if you've got this app. And if you didn't, they would take you aside. There'd be somebody in there and they would show you how to use that, show you, put this phone on your app and show you how to use it. And I remember thinking at the time, do these people not realize that what they're doing is showing themselves out of a job? And of course, 2 or 3 years later, the pandemic's at its height, all these banks are closed anyway. The only way now that you can do this banking was using your phone app or online banking at home. And then guess what? A year or two later, just as the pandemic's coming to an end, or what, you know, the so-called pandemic, these branches are now shut. The very branches that were showing you how to do this are now closed. And I make a point, and it's just because, like we were saying earlier, a little change that you can do. My girlfriend and I were pretty much on the same page on this. We know that cashless is a huge problem, not just for the, you know, they can take the money out of your account, as it were, straight away, but they can shut your account down as well. So no matter how much money you might have in your cashless ID wallet, if they, for whatever reason, don't want you spending what is rightfully yours, they can just turn it off. And we already know that the system, it shoots first and asks questions later. It's always been like that. There's never a comeuppance if they might have made a mistake, or maybe they just didn't like what you were saying that day, or maybe your social credit score went below the threshold and so you've lost access to your digital wallet, whatever it might be. So we're always withdrawing cash from the ATM, and we're always spending it as well. Every time we go to a cafe, whatever it is, we're always using cash. And I think if, you know, providing it costs the same, which here it does, sometimes actually they charge a bit more if you're using a card in these little independent cafes. But regardless, use cash, because the more you use cash, the more the system can see cash is being used, the less likely they are to move it. The more everybody just swipes a phone over a sensor, the more the system thinks, great, you know, a few more of these, and we can shut the last few branches that are left down, and everybody can be cashless. And again, like Mike says, it's easier to try and stop them from taking these things away in the first place than it is, once they're gone, to try and get them back. And that's absolutely true, because you try getting the banks back, and again, I'm no fan of the banks. It's just that they, at least as far as it goes, represents cash, and there's a million problems, you know, with the financial system as well. But I guarantee you, cash in your pocket is a lot better than this cashless cryptocurrency idea that they have. And when I hear people say, oh, but cryptocurrency can't be, it's great, that's true freedom because they can't interfere with that. And I think, what a crock of shit. If you haven't seen the way they can make Bitcoin go up and double or half in price within 24 hours, or move sideways, or whichever way they want, if you haven't seen that happen, then you haven't been paying attention. And if you think a cryptocurrency that's worth many, many billion or hundreds of billions of dollars in totality, if you think it's just small guys like Mike and me that are able to push that up and down by half or double, you're insane. The only people that can do that are the people that can print money, quite literally, and buy it up and play these games. And the fact that they can play these games with these cryptocurrencies proves that it's anything but independent and honest and separate from the system. The cryptocurrencies is the bloody system.
Right. And it's the only way things happen in this world is because of pressure or manipulation. They're manipulating the market there. So in order for us to be able to make any changes, is through pressure and manipulation. We need to manipulate them because, see, we're being manipulated on a constant basis. The only way that we can affect our system the way we choose to is by applying pressure. And by applying pressure, we manipulate the system to our advantage. This is like going to Vegas. You go to Vegas and you play the slot machine and you're playing by their odds. And maybe the odds in that machine might be fluctuating, you know, and obviously they fluctuate more to the casino's advantage than yours. So what we're doing is we're playing in a system where it fluctuates, but we don't even know the odds. We have no idea what the odds are. They do, and they fluctuate it to their advantage all the time. So what needs to happen is by applying pressure and us getting involved, we begin to manipulate the system to our advantage. And that's the only way we're going to make change. Because if they're closing banks and they're not making ATMs available so you can't get cash and all that kind of stuff, apply pressure. There's a million ways to apply pressure. Learn from the best. Learn from them. Learn how they manipulate you and become better at it, the game, than they are. And that's what I've been focusing on for a long time. You have to be able to manipulate their game better than they can, or even change the game. Don't play by their rules, because if you play by their rules, you will be the only one playing by their rules, because they don't have rules. You do. The rules are only there for the majority of the population. Those above the majority don't have those rules. They say they do, but it doesn't exist for them. That's how they can always remain on top. If you want to go to a casino and you want to play a game of the roulette wheel or whatever it is, if it's fixed to their advantage. Who's going to call them on that? Because you don't know. So you're throwing your money down, and they have a 90% advantage over you. Well, what's your chances? You keep going back there and losing your money. You think it's going to get better. It's not. So like in our system, in our banking system, it's all manipulated against us. They keep adding more rules and more rules for us to follow. But it only makes it more difficult for us to exist. Yet, like I said, they don't have any rules. Their rules are non-existent. They're only in written form, but nobody gets held accountable. When the banks do something wrong, nobody goes to jail. Or if they do, it's a patsy. They sacrifice because they have no problem eating their own. They have no problem sacrificing their own.
Yeah, they get rid of one guy.
Yeah, they get rid of the low guy on the totem pole.
And something else, I mean, what I've often thought when I've watched videos, certainly in the earlier days, that, okay, so I understand, I see all these things are wrong, but, you know, what can I do? And part of this, or the main part of this show, is we will be exploring these ideas. But just before, you know, we're past the hour now, closing out, one thing I really wanted to say about this was, think of all the censorship that there is now, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, and all the other social media platforms where they're really clamping down. If we had no impact on things, and I'm talking about everybody here that uses social media in some way, if you're watching this video, you know, that includes you. If we had no impact, if what we said and what we did didn't matter, then they wouldn't have to censor anything at all. They could just let everything be open. So the fact that they're having to clamp down, having to shut people up, having to either shut down channels entirely or shadow ban, keep moving channels over from a more mainstream type social platform to one of the ones on the periphery, none of that would be happening if we didn't have any power. It's because we do have power, and they fear us coming together and forming a consensus. That's what they really fear. That's why they continuously have to divide, and they keep chopping up, you know, male, female, young, old, and the different races. And that was kind of the starting point. And, you know, don't need me to tell you which ways they've been dividing society up since then, because if they can keep you focused on that or some sort of shiny object, you know, there's a new car coming out next week that, you know, why don't you work a bit harder so you can get yourself that car, or getting, you know, if they can have you focused on that, or, you know, he's gay, she's not, and she's a lesbian or bi, and that shouldn't be allowed in the workplace or whatever it is. It's like, if they've got you focused on that, you can't be looking towards anything meaningful where we can begin to resolve things. And again, I maintain that's why the censorship is so pervasive now, because they've realized that there is a huge undercurrent of people beginning to wake up. Now, granted, the vast majority of the people that are beginning to wake up, they're going to fall into all the usual traps and be misled in all the ways, at least for me, that I was early on. And a lot of those people are going to spend a lot of time in those traps, especially now where as I would call the most of the legitimate channels on YouTube have long gone. There are newer ones, and there are ones popping up all the time, but all the big ones have gone, which means as these people start their awakening and they're looking for truth, they're going to run into all the bigger channels and all the mainstream all the mainstream social media channels, let's call them like that, Facebook, even Twitter, or X as it's called now. You know, people might think they can say a bit more right now, and maybe they can versus 2 or 3 years ago, but it's still a controlled opposition channel. You know, Elon Musk is no better than the rest of them. In fact, you know, like Mike says, the analogy of taking over the village. You're not going to take over the village by saying, hey, I'm the bad guy and I want you all to sit down and do as I say. You're going to take over the village by oh, hi, I know the other lot that were running this place were up to no good, so vote for me. And, you know, I've got all this money and I'm gonna promote freedom, and everyone's gonna go, that's our guy. Of course that's how it's gonna go. And again, none of this would be happening if we didn't have any power. I believe that 100%. And so even though I might not have all the answers as to how we're going to fix this, I know that somehow between us we do have the answers for those reasons. If we didn't have the ability to fix things, why would they waste any time whatsoever in censorship and algorithms and shadow ballot? They wouldn't care less. They'd just say what you want.
Yeah, I'll do this in closing. If there wasn't something going on, then we wouldn't have all this distractions, shadow banning. The truth is surrounded in lures and traps. And as we said in the last episode, the truth is generally not black and white. It's surrounded and in the gray areas, and you got to kind of pick and choose. It doesn't like to be portrayed as something just, oh, this is the truth, that's the way it is. Everything here is pixelated. It's an illusion. So you're looking at the truth through an illusionary veil, and it's really hard to really get the gist of it. But so what you got to do is you have to go ahead and look into things, question everything, and find out what works for you. And you generally know what's right or wrong. Everybody has a moral compass, and go with that. And know and believe in yourself. That's the biggest thing. Believe in yourself. Don't believe in the drama. Don't believe in all the emotional feeling crap that pollutes everybody, because it's all pushed by our general media. So begin to clarify what's going on in your life. Get some clarity, you know. Begin thinking for yourselves. Don't listen to the radio. Don't listen to the TV, whatever. Begin to get some clarity and get a grasp on what's really going on in your life, what's important. Make a list and start figuring out how you're going to change the things in life that don't serve you, your family, and those around you. Because if it means something to you, then generally it's going to mean something to everybody else as well, or the mass majority of people, you know. And you're the only one that's going to help you. And most likely you're the only one that's going to be helping yourself and your family. Because you're usually going to have one person within a family that's actually going to see things for the way they are. And so you're planning for yourself as well as your whole entire family. And it's very difficult because a lot of times your spouse will think a certain way. They might be a little bit on board, but they're not there. And they just don't understand what's going on. So you have to plan for all of it, all of them as well. And it's a very difficult process, but if you don't start now, there won't be a tomorrow to look forward to.
Yeah, well said, mate. And even if that sounds overwhelming to some people, I just like this idea of just change one thing. Either start doing one thing that you know will be helpful in some way, or stop doing one thing that you know is in some way to your detriment, or the people around you's detriment, or even, you know, extend that if you feel like it, your neighborhoods, the area, your town, whatever. Just do one thing, one little thing, or stop doing one thing, and we'll see how it can go from there. And I'm going to have to do that as well, because I'm far from a saint or perfect too. So I think we've got a long way. All have got a long way to go, and we've got a lot of work ahead of us. All of us do, for sure. All right, mate. Well, I think that makes a nice end to the first real episode that we've gone in on. So I'd like to thank everybody for watching. Leave a like if you've enjoyed it, and do leave a comment with your thoughts one way or the other, or any ideas for a show. And so, yeah, from me inside the UK, until next time, take care. Bye-bye.